All right, we are going to get started. Today we are talking about aerobes and anaerobes. I'm going to give you some information, some examples, and then how you can study these microbes. So let's get started. Here we have obligate aerobes, and change the color here. Obligate aerobes. And here I'm going to give you some info. So one, they require oxygen for growth. Another piece of info is that oxygen is the terminal electron acceptor in the ETC, or electron transport chain. So the oxygen is let's make a short, electron acceptor. In the ETC, electron transport chain. Another one is cellular respiration. In cellular respiration, cells break down. They break down the sugar or fats to obtain ATP, and obligate aerobes have cellular respiration. So it's the cell breakdown. Of sugar or fats, so that they can obtain ATP. And this is what you want. And we see this most from aerobic respiration. All right. So those are our facts. Some examples, microbe examples. We have Mycobacterium, tuberculosis, now this microbe has a waxy covering. So it's called a mycolic acid. That is the waxy covering. And it's not good for, well, you can't do gram staining for this particular microbe to identify it. Another, and the most common disease that it does cause is tuberculosis. Another example, we have Pseudomonas. Aeruginosa. And you can find these microbes in the soil or water, or they can spread through the healthcare, like the hospitals, clinics, places like that. So that's where you can see these microbes, or they can be found. So in soil or water, or you can find them in, or they can spread through the healthcare field, healthcare facilities. How about that? Healthcare environment facilities. They commonly infect the blood and lungs. Blood and lungs. And the disease is pneumonia. So now that we have the information, how are we going to remember this material? So an easy way that I do is micro mind map. And this is what I do. So I'll give you a short version. So we have our microbe, and our microbe is the obligate aerobe. That's our microbe. Then we know that oxygen is involved. So we have oxygen. We know that is an electron acceptor. And that we can get ATP from it through aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration, and then you get tons of ATP, tons of ATP. Another branch is listing the microbes, any microbes that are associated with this. Well, of course there's going to be, but examples you can list as well. And then you can list how they affect where they're found. Like with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, we see that we have a disease that affects humans. We also see that with Pseudomonas aeruginosa, that is found in soil and water. It can spread through the healthcare field or healthcare facilities, found in blood and lungs. And then from there, it can cause a disease, pneumonia. And then here for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, what did we say? That it has a waxy covering, which is called mycolic acid. So you can put more microbes for examples, and then this is how I would remember this material, that is needed for obligate aerobe, and I would practice this over and over and over. The next one is facultative anaerobes. Now I would use I don't know if I mentioned. No, I didn't. So here I have obligate aerobes, and I have the O in purple, but the rest of the letters are in red. Well, this will help you remember what the main parts of obligate aerobes are, and is that they need oxygen. So oxygen is required. So I use the O here for oxygen because oxygen is required. For facultative anaerobes, I'm using the N and the O. And for the N, it's no oxygen. And then here I'm using the O, and that's for oxygen. And then I will explain what that's all about. Oxygen. Oh, back. Oxygen. And I'll explain that. So here we have, let's see, oxygen. Some info on oxygen and info on no oxygen. So with oxygen, well, with both of them, there is growth. We know that there is growth in the presence of oxygen and when oxygen is not present, but there is more growth when oxygen is present. When oxygen is not present, we see anaerobic respiration, or fermentation. We see ATP forming or being produced when oxygen is present and when oxygen is not present. But there is way more ATP, way more ATP produced when oxygen is present. Now there are other electron acceptors involved. So when oxygen is present, it goes through aerobic respiration. And we went on what I explained earlier is that a ton of ATP is produced and that oxygen is the electron acceptor. So when there is no oxygen present, there will be no electron acceptor, which means no ATP, but we need to produce ATP. So there has to be another type of electron acceptor. And here we see other electron acceptors can be nitrate, sulfate, and carbonate. So how are you, example. Example 1 is E. coli. And you can find them in your intestine. Another example, yeast. And I would do the same thing to remember. So we have facultative anaerobe. And then you're going to have your oxygen and then no oxygen. And then you're going to list all of the details with oxygen. So there is more growth, and you'll see more ATP being produced. When oxygen is not present, we see anaerobic respiration. I should change the abbreviation so you won't get confused with the other one. So how about Anna? And respiration. And then we also see fermentation. And very little ATP being produced. ATP being produced. Some out of no oxygen. We also see out of no oxygen being produced or not being present, we see other electron acceptors. And then you can put 1, 2, 3. You can put that here. And then examples, E. coli and yeast. And then you can give more information about E. coli and yeast. And you commit it to memory. The next one is obligate anaerobes. Now here I'll use the N in anaerobes and spell no oxygen. So no oxygen. And then some info, they are unable to use oxygen for energy yielding reactions. So like I explained earlier, that there is an electron carrier, and that electron carrier is part of the process. Electron acceptor is a part of the process of creating ATP. If there is no oxygen present, then they have to use other electron carriers in its place. So with obligate anaerobes, they are unable to use oxygen for producing ATP. Example here is Clostridium. Clostridium is a bacterium that produces endospores, and endospores are they're like I have to draw it. We have our vegetative cell here. That's the cell that would grow and reproduce, multiply. And then on the outside, it has a covering, and this hard covering protects it from harsh environments like they might not have the right nutrients in that environment. So it would create a shell and protect the vegetative cell. So when the conditions are right, then the vegetative cell will come out of that protective coating and then reproduce. But until then, they are protected. So these are endospores. And they produce them. Side note. So then disease that we see with Clostridium, we have tetanus and botulism. And here, same thing for our micro mind mapping. We have our microbe in the center. We know that they are unable to use oxygen, so no oxygen to create ATP. So then there will be no ATP, no energy. And then we have an example, Clostridium. And then some diseases, a couple of diseases. And botulism. And if you want to add more, you can. More notes, more microbes, you can do that as well. And then just a side note that they are endospore producers. Okay. Aerotolerant anaerobes. So here, some info. Oxygen is not their source. Oxygen is not their source for growth. They ferment carbohydrates. Oops. That looks like an E. Carbohydrates. 2 lactic acid. Another note is that they can grow when oxygen is present. And this can be, so when oxygen is present, these microbes produce superoxide radicals, which are toxic for them. So superoxide radicals. They are toxic. So for them to combat that, they produce SODs. Superoxide dismutase. These are enzymes. Oops. Dismutase. Enzymes that they neutralize the radicals so that these microbes So they neutralize the radicals so that these microbes can grow in the presence of oxygen. So they are neutralizers. And let's see. So when oxygen is present, there is aerobic respiration. And then there is growth when oxygen concentration is lower than what's in the air. And we know that the air does not totally consist of oxygen. There are carbon dioxide and nitrates, nitrogen in the air. So, and also oxygen in the air. So when the oxygen is lower in their environment, lower than what's in the air, then they can grow. So we see aerotolerance. We're using the O for oxygen, for oxygen. And we are using the N for no oxygen, oxygen. An example here is lactobacilli. Now, lactobacilli are acidophiles. So their environment has to be acidic, and that could range from like 1 to 3 on the pH scale. And you can find these microbes in yogurt. Let's see. And then again, here with the micro mind mapping, we have our microbe, and then just the information stemming from it. Oxygen, we see that there's growth. When oxygen is not present, they ferment carbohydrates, so they are fermenters. Fermentation to produce lactic acid. What else? So when oxygen is present, the microbe produces let's put radicals. And then they also produce, because radicals are produced, SODs. That's not even an S. SODs are produced to neutralize the radicals. And then we also see, let's stem here, aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration, and that's the oxygen in the air. So how can you put this one? Oxygen concentration has to be lower than air. Has to be lower than air. And then you have your microbe. And we know that they are acidophiles, acidic environments, and you can find them in yogurt. And another information, they're good for your, let's see, it's good for your body. So body regulates the microbes that are already in your body. So it's good for your body as well. Let's see. And our last one, microaerophiles. Did I? Yes, I did. So microaerophiles, we are using the A here for aerobic. So aerobic, and the O for oxygen. And some info. So they require oxygen. And because they require oxygen, we see aerobic respiration. Another note is there's growth. Oh no. Let's back this up. Here. This belongs to, even though that they can grow in the presence of oxygen. And you see that, and you see that, let me go back. We see that here, that is not their main source, but they can grow in the presence of oxygen due to their enzyme that they produce that neutralizes the toxins that are produced. So that is, but these are for my other notes. This microbe, that oxygen is required, and we see aerobic respiration. And then with this microbe, there is growth when oxygen the oxygen concentration is lower in the environment. Concentrate is lower than what's in the air. And then again, you can do your micro mind map, and you see what happens when oxygen is present. There's aerobic respiration. And that the oxygen has to be lower. So low O2 than what's in the air, And I didn't get an example for this one, but I will have it in my notes, because I will give you my notes so that you can review this, and I'll come up with an example for this one. But you guys have the gist of it for our anaerobes and aerobes and anaerobes. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat